Hi, and welcome to ComicCon at Home. This panel is titled Teaching to Teachers, Resources and Strategies for Upping Your Teaching Graphic Novels Game. So glad that you all can join us. I am Talia Hurwich. I'm a doctoral candidate at NYU. I study using graphic novels in education. I co-wrote a book with Meryl Jaffe called Worth 1,000 Words. And we have a fantastic panel ahead of you with some really great people who are top of their game. I'm really excited for the conversation as it's going to unfold. But let's introduce ourselves. Shveta, might you begin?
Sure. I'm Shveta Miller, and I taught high school ELA in New York City public schools and abroad for a short time. And I started using graphic novels in about well over a decade ago, and have never looked back because of the surprising benefits beyond what I already expected. There were a lot more that we'll talk about today. I'm excited that I'm now getting to write about all that I've learned over the years teaching graphic novels and collaborating with other educators like we have here today, and sharing those best practices in a new book called Hacking Graphic Novels, which I'll share some of what's in there today with you. And excited to be here.
Great, thank you. Bill, why don't you go?
Sure. My name is Bill Boerman-Cornell. I've been researching the effective use of graphic novels in especially high school classrooms, but a little bit in middle school as well, probably for 15 years now. Originally did my dissertation kind of focused on using graphic novels in history class. And I have two books out. One of them deals with using graphic novels in all high school courses. So everything including history, math, science, the whole ball of wax. But then I have a new book that comes out in 2 days that's specific to English, and another one that I'm just starting work on that'll deal with using graphic novels in the STEM fields. Also, I really like to read graphic novels. So.
Yeah, thank you. Britta, why don't you go now?
Yeah, hi. My name is Britta Beardsley, and I'm an 8th grade language arts teacher in Oak Forest, Illinois. And for the past 2 years, I've had the pleasure of being a professional development facilitator with Great Minds. So outside of the classroom, I also get to help teach teachers a wonderful and brilliant curriculum. I've been using graphic novels since I started teaching, especially with this curriculum. I use them as supplemental text, and I just love getting to teach kids and teach teachers. So I'm really happy to be here today.
Awesome. And Meryl will close off with you.
Hi, I'm the caboose. Hi, I'm Meryl Jaffe, and it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I have been in education for more years than I care to tell anyone. I have taught from 1st through 8th grades, but currently I'm an educational consultant. I do a lot of work with the New York City Board of Education. I'm an instructor online for Johns Hopkins University Center for Talented Youth, and I have a number of publications that I've authored, but the most recent I've collaborated with Talia, which has been awesome, and it's Worth 1,000 Words, using graphic novels to teach visual and verbal literacy.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So the whole point and idea of this panel is ultimately, okay, you're convinced graphic novels are a great tool to teach. What do you do? How do you do it? And hopefully these panelists in their introductions have really demonstrated just the depth of knowledge that we're going to be drawing from as we have a conversation. But let's first start out, and I'm going to let this be a lot more of an open conversation, so feel free to jump in when you have an answer. But from the very beginning, what led you to teach with graphic novels in the first place?
Well, I actually may be the only person here who sadly is admitting that I was not a graphic novel fan. I was not an advocate. They weren't allowed in my house. They weren't allowed in my classrooms. And years ago, I don't even know how many years ago it is now, because it is a number of years ago, I was I was starting to write about literacy, and I said, maybe I should look at graphic novels. And my kids gave me one graphic novel. They said, like, really, you're discovering this now? So they gave me one graphic novel, and it convinced me. It blew my mind in terms of the complexity of the text, in terms of the way you have to integrate so many different aspects. It really involves higher order cognition on so many different levels, because you are creating the story by using the text and by using the image and by using the design and by using what's not there, by using what is there. And we'll go on and on in the 45 minutes talking about all that. So I wasn't on board then, but I am now. I think the world is changing, and I think visual literacy is incredibly important. And I think that not only do graphic novels reach all kinds of readers and motivate, but they really help with cognition, and they really help with visual literacy and overall communication.
Meryl, what was the graphic novel they handed you?
So someone always asks me that question. It was Eiffel Giants by Joe Kelly and J.N. Nomura. And if you guys don't know it, it is incredible. It is you don't know if this girl really kills giants. You don't know if it's one giant metaphor. You don't know anything, and you're going through this very powerful story with this 5th grade girl, and it blew my mind.
Well, I'll go too, to echo a little bit of Meryl's experience, just that I didn't grow up reading comics or being a big fan. I was under the impression it was mostly, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. It was Marvel and superhero, tight clothes, big breasts, the women. I didn't relate to the female images I was seeing. And no one, it was never incorporated into the classroom, even in college or graduate school. And it wasn't until the movie version of Persepolis came out, where now it was probably before then, but in my life, as far as I noticed, it was in the mainstream sort of atmosphere. We would see trailers of it, billboards of it, and the movie is basically an animated version of her drawings in the graphic novel, Marjane Satrapi's graphic novel Persepolis. And I was teaching 11th grade world literature. We had a required unit on memoir, and it just seemed perfect timing to order that book, because I could tell just from the images the power that this story was going to have to teach my students about a formative experience of someone their age in a very different part of the world. Yeah, similar to Meryl, a teacher handed me a resource to get started, the Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, that I'm sure we've all pored over many times. It's sort of one of those seminal texts for teaching this form. But even just a quick glance through that convinced me, like, oh, there's analytical potential and rigor here. Let's get to work. So yeah, again, not a lifelong fan either, but convinced by looking at it as a teacher.
So maybe I ought to jump in and identify myself as a lifelong fan. When I was, so I'm older than the rest of you, I think. Meryl, we'll talk later.
We'll duke it out later.
Yeah, but I grew up in the 1970s and remember my Aunt Agatha at one point bringing me to a small comic book store in the town in West Michigan where I lived. And she took me in the store. I'd never been in a comic book store before. They'd also had books, which was exciting. She gave me a $20 bill. And in those days, Marvel comics were 35 cents. So this was like, I loved comics, but I'd only read like 4 of them. And so it was fantastic. And, when I was growing up in those days, you were often told, well, that's not serious. It's nothing serious. You shouldn't be spending time with that. But it led to loving to read. Well, then we fast forward to many, many years later, and I'm a history teacher. I'm sorry, English teacher in high school, and come out of my classroom after spending, 50 minutes trying to get students to have a serious discussion about probably Act 3 of Hamlet or something. And I come out and walking down the hallway on my way to the teacher's lounge, and there are these two students who are passionately talking about something. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, what are they talking about? And it sounds like they're discussing a book. So I get excited, I move a little closer. And I think it was actually Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, the one that dealt with Midsummer Night's Dream. So it was actually connected to Shakespeare. And they were really intense about like, no, this is what it means. And I thought, man, if I could get that in my classroom. So I said, can I see what you're looking at? And they, sure. And they showed it to me. And I thought, that's a comic book about Shakespeare. And at that point I was hooked. And then in grad school, when it came time to pick a topic for dissertation, like Talia, I was going like, yeah, I no question about this one. I know where I'm going. So yeah, great.
Britta, do you have anything to add?
Oh, sorry, I had to find the unmute button. You'd think we'd be used to that by now. No, I mean, similar to everyone else, I mean, well, except for Dr. BC, I didn't grow up reading comic books, but they were always around when I was in college in all of my courses, whether it was a classmate mentioning it or a professor mentioning how they can be used in the classroom. And so I was lucky enough that one of my supervising teachers when I student taught actually taught with a graphic novel. And so I was able to see how they used it as not just help for comprehension, but also a complex text. And when I encountered a complex text when I started teaching on my own, I immediately thought, well, why not bring in a graphic novel to help us really engage and like dig into what we can reveal about this text. And so, I mean, similar answers to everyone else, right? It's really just a golden nugget that we can all use and should cherish and really help students with in the classroom.
And what about you, Talia?
So I came in, I don't know if I'd call myself a lifelong comic reader. I came in high school. A friend of mine was putting together a comic book club, and he thought I'd really dig this type of stuff. And so this was in the early 2000s. So it was when they were using Thor to talk about the American war in Iraq. It was shortly after the Alias miniseries came out, which became Jessica Jones. It was a lot of really intense stuff that led me to really enjoying Vertigo and the Vertigo comics that happened during those times. And I now teach using Day Tripper in a philosophy course because I freaking love that book. And from there, that transitioned into graphic novels. I started actually, before being a teacher, I started as an assistant librarian, and I was tasked with developing the graphic novel collection. And I think that was actually part of the reason why they wanted me, was so that I could help develop that collection. And from there, I started teaching. And I was starting actually, funny enough, when I started teaching, whenever I reached a topic that I was super nervous about, I'd bring a graphic novel in. Not simply because of the motivational elements, although yes, that exists, but it was also a safe place for me. And it was a place for me that I really was engaged in. And I've come to learn and find that when you're teaching, if you're engaged, if you're excited, the kids notice that and they latch onto it as well. And so that's really how I started drawing that into my own pedagogy, and I started learning. And once I started pursuing this doctorate, it felt like a no-brainer. Thanks for asking. I think the next set of questions effectively comes to this premise that when you move into a classroom, when you have a plan, when you have the theories, when you have the ideas, when you move into a classroom, surprises happen, always. You can't avoid it. So what were those surprises when you started using comics? What were the pleasant surprises? What were the challenging surprises? And how did you overcome them?
I'd like to start with this one because I have a lot of surprises. very surprising experience. You know, I began knowing that there was intellectual depth there for us to mine. But back then, it was early in my teaching career, and I was still in this habit of preparing questions for students to guide their reading, really loaded questions that sort of directed them to elements that I thought were key or symbolic or significant. And that was working fine for a lot of prose texts. And it wasn't until I started teaching Persepolis that one time in the memoir unit that I realized on day one that was not going to cut it. Guided questions for their reading. Because immediately when we started answering those questions as a group, I realized that on one tiny page, page 1 of Persepolis, it's such a famous page, you can maybe picture it, where it has just a profile, simple, iconic, almost stick figure-like cartoon drawing of the main character, Margie, and then a similar one that's wider, in a wider panel next to it, that basically looks like her copied, and it's her peers, and they're all wearing a veil, and on first glance, they look pretty glum. They look somewhat docile, and they all look the same on first glance. But boy, was I disabused of that interpretation from bringing this up in front of my students, because they saw subtleties in these panels that look very spare, that I could never have seen as a single viewer. And they were generating questions that the night before when I was lesson planning, I could never have anticipated. And I do believe this applies to teaching any kind of text in an English classroom as well, but this was the turning point in my teaching, that it helped me see that I needed to equip my students with the skills to generate the questions that are going to guide their own reading. But that was, I don't know how long it would have taken for that to have been clearer to me than presenting them with a visual text. So
it's funny that, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
It's funny what you're commenting on, because I started with comics with younger kids, and my surprise was actually just the opposite. I found that they thought they wanted to breeze through, and they knew how to read the comic, and they didn't. And so they weren't getting the nuances that they needed to, because a comic isn't like a picture book or a chapter book with pictures where the pictures reinforce the text. Graphic novels, the visual elements, the design, all of it contribute to the story. So it's funny that
I agree that it was similar to that. I think the key difference, because even in high school, I don't want our viewers to think that at high school that will be different. You very well get the experience of students, especially now, they've all come in 11th grade having read a graphic novel. Not all of them, but it's much more likely than it was a decade ago. You know, they're winning the Newbery, they're the National Book Award. So they've had the experience. And like Meryl says, with the younger students,
you just need to get them to slow down.
Exactly, they devour it. For them, it's often like, oh, what they're so proud to tell you is, I read it all last night. And that happened with Persepolis as well. Like they read the whole book in one night or a few nights, but we were studying it for 6 weeks. So yeah, I think that first day, what helped is that we were only looking at that first page. So our questions were only focused on that. So that was what kind of gave them the ability to, well, if we're going to sit here for 40 minutes talking about these 5 panels, well, yeah, I see that and I see that. Well, you say that, but what about in this corner here? And it's sort of naturally giving them that focus and time to really look more closely. I realized that, you know, coming with prepared questions was going to really limit that experience.
I also found that when I did get my students to slow down with the graphic novels, it translated into slowing down with everything else also. And that was another surprise, in the sense that I wasn't expecting the graphic novels to really help me with that, but they did, because they became more thoughtful about everything else that they were integrating as they were reading.
I have one that may fall right in between these two. And it was a time when students helped me realize a different way to teach with graphic novels. So we were looking at, I don't know if any of you remember Plain Jane's, Cecil Castellucci, right? It was under the Minx imprint, which I think was DC's attempt to woo girls to actually start reading these things. It was a long time ago. There's a panel in there where the main character, I mean, most of the characters are named Jane, but the main character, Jane, is coming into a cafeteria, and there's, you know, you can see all the tables. She's coming in, and there are some popular girls at one table, and then there are her future friends, the Janes, at another table. And when she gets near the popular girls, one of them says, you know, hi, why don't you come sit with us? And they're all smiling, and there's a little exchange first about what's your name. She says Jane, and the other one says, oh, cute name. And there's just a little bit of an exchange that's verbal, but it's nothing that's, I mean, it's, you know, it's all subtext. There's nothing in the text that gives anything away. Then in this final panel, after she says, why don't you sit with us, the girls are all smiling at her. And I don't know why I was teaching with this, and instead of what I had on my lesson plan, I asked my students, so should she sit with them? And we had a discussion for like 15 minutes, and it was very clear. Everyone was saying no. I'm going, well, wait a minute, why not? I mean, the girls are smiling, and they started listing stuff like, yeah, but look at the smiles. I'm like, that's a line that's this long. How are you? But everyone agreed, and I agreed too. And then another thing they said was, well, look at what's on their trays. And I hadn't realized this before, but the other people in the cafeteria have food on their trays. These girls all just have bottles of water, and that's it. And they said, that's not right. And then they said, and then, you know, look at the way you can tell by what she's saying. And that was when I started to realize, instead of trying to show people the interpretations that we see in them, like what Shveta is saying, I needed to start to put that out there for them to interpret. And like Meryl is saying, both be able to interpret by, and I always say it's three things. It's the text, it's the image, and then maybe most importantly, it's the way the image interacts with the text. And that third thing makes a really big difference. So yeah. What about you, Britta?
Yeah, your story made me think of now my story. So one of the first times I really dove into using a graphic novel with like more than just comprehension was when we were reading All Quiet on the Western Front. And if you've ever read it, it's a fairly complex text. And so with 8th grade, we're typically looking at a lot of the descriptive and figurative language in the text, and we were having a really hard time. We were having a hard time finding evidence in this one scene. It's when Paul, the narrator, is stuck in a shell hole and he stabs an enemy soldier, and he has a lot of conflicts about it because this is a human, not just an enemy. And our main question is, how does literature help illuminate the effects of war? And then to help guide us to that, it's also, well, what are the psychological effects of war? Pretty heavy questions. And reading this scene in the text, students were having a very difficult time finding evidence to help us answer those questions. And so I was digging all night long to figure out how we could help, and found a graphic novel version. Looked at that scene in the text because in our previous module, we studied form versus content. And so I was like, you know what, we're gonna use this different form of the novel to help us find evidence and figure out what are the psychological effects of war, like how is this narrator Paul feeling when he stabs this soldier? And using the visual of the text, I didn't even really have to ask students, you know, like, okay, let's look at one panel. They looked at it and they said, oh, look at his face here. Oh, but look at the soldier's face, and look, there's blood, and like all these details in the corners, and just they had some context of what was happening, but then when they were given this beautiful artwork to help them see what was happening, they then had instant confidence to go back to our core text and find evidence to support how the narrator was feeling. So in my case, I was using them side by side, and although it was just a supplementary text, they were able to use that to build their knowledge with the core text. And the rest of the novel, they were so confident in finding evidence because they had that experience and they felt so good about it because they were able to use what they learned from the visual. And we then referenced it throughout the novel because they wanted to see this other form. Well, is it any different? Like, is it any better? And we would compare and contrast like how things are being portrayed and what that leads us to answer our essential question. And it was really quite a beautiful thing. They taught me a lot more than I thought than I thought I do, you know, like they were really able to teach me and now help me this year as I prepare again to use that specific graphic novel throughout the module.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think one of the things that surprised me to some degree is the amount of social cognition required in teaching. I would do this thing with when I used to teach middle school, to teach pacing and sequence. And the idea was I would say, okay, we're going to draw a panel in the scene from Little Red Riding Hood when she sees the wolf. And I am the artist. For what it's worth, I'm not a particularly good artist. It is all stick figures, and the wolf looks a little bit like a squirrel, but the kids learn to be respectful in their input as well in this way. They tell me what to draw. I draw it with guiding questions such as, and what's on the face, and what does the face look like, etc., etc. After a single panel, you then say, okay, now let's take that scene and turn it into 3 panels. And ask them, okay, how do you extend that? And often what happens is a change in Little Red Riding Hood's facial expressions or her reaction. So one year, the thing was, okay, so first she looks surprised, then she looks scared, and then she looks curious with, well, hello, Mr. Wolf. And you ask then, okay, how do you draw this? And the thing that was the most surprising is the student who really hit the nail on the head for how to do that was an aspiring stand-up comedian. Because he didn't know how to draw, but he knew how to read people's faces. And I think that was perhaps like a really big surprise. And you use that as a pivoting point for, it's not necessarily about how well you draw. It's about your ability to visually comprehend the world and to replicate that understanding.
Well, that's interesting. One study I've been waiting to hear from, and I don't do much work with special education, but I probably should. I would love to see somebody who really looks at the possibilities for people who are on the autism spectrum and often really struggle at understanding facial expressions because they're not, I mean, we sometimes draw them, right? Emojis, a smile is like this, but some people smile and they go, and actually their corners of their mouth turned down. Well, by reading graphic novels, you get the opportunity to look at all these different faces, and it's low risk, right? I mean, you know, just like when you read a book to discover social things, there's no danger that someone is going to get upset with you for your misinterpretation. You just come back and do it again. And that's one of the, I mean, the thing I keep learning about graphic novels is that they have all these affordances, all these things that they can do. And they also have some constraints that we don't realize until we're trying to make them do something that, yeah, they're not as good at doing that. So I really like that. That's very interesting. That's fantastic.
Bill, there's actually research that just came out. I think I read it in English Journal, and it's exactly about that. He researched using manga with autism students, and I think his own son, he had come to the idea through his own son and observing his experience reading manga. I think it came out in 2020, or I read it this year, maybe 2019, but you should look that up in English Journal.
I will do that. You know, the funny thing is it used to be easy to keep up with the research because we only had like 10 articles a year that came out. And now, and this I think is exciting for teachers too, the amount of research being done and the discoveries we're making, it's an exciting world to be a part of. Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Yeah. No, totally, totally agreed. It's amazing the amount of things that are out there and all of the stuff that's available. And I think towards that, we're going to start sharing some places that you can all start to also go to if you ever have questions, if you're planning on using graphic novels. So basically, the first place is, okay, you want to teach with graphic novels, you're not certain what to teach, which graphic novels to use. How do you find the graphic novel for your classroom? So resources that can help you find graphic novels. Meryl, why don't you start and explain what you shared?
Okay, I have a website, meryljaffe.com, and in the image I have, it's a tool that you can use when you go online. It's under resources, and you can search for books. There are close to 300 graphic novels that I've entered. There's a summary for the book, and if you look on the screen, you can't really see that clearly, but it has from grades K through 12. There are certain keywords that you can plug in so that you can try to find whatever book that you may want to find. It has grade levels. It has, if there's anything that you might want to be concerned about, that there might be any challenges about that you need to know about the book, I have it in there. I have awards in there. So there's a summary of, oh, here I have 240 books. It's more than that right now. That's one of the resources, and that's the image that you see in the picture. You can also go to ALA. I have all these different links here. Feel free to go to those in addition to the website. ALA has great lists of graphic novels with all sorts of recommendations. They have top lists, they have bottom lists, they have lists for this age and that age and this topic and that topic. And School Library Journal is another one. So there are many, many, many. I didn't want to, I know that everyone else has other resources too, so I will pass that on now to the next person who's on the queue.
With your Shveta.
Yeah, Meryl, that's amazing. I'm just scrambling to write that down right now, that your website, you've cataloged all of those graphic novels. That's fabulous. I'm going to start recommending that as my top resource.
Oh, thank you.
So mine is more, let's say you are very new to this idea, not entirely convinced, or maybe you use an adopted curriculum and you don't have the liberty to suddenly teach a different text altogether, and you just want these ideas to sort of digest as you start collecting some titles. I would say I have done so much networking and collaboration with educators since researching for my book on Facebook. I really only use Facebook for talking with teachers because apparently that's where the teachers are. And so I have joined a few Facebook groups that were always sharing, oh, I just read this article on The Guardian about this new graphic novel that's coming out in the UK about this, random part of history over there that we've never learned about, or, and then we just throw it in the Facebook group. So two of my favorite ones that are really active, people are posting every day, great ideas, is We Need Diverse Comics. So that's really a great place where people are emphasizing, you might find it hard to believe, but even the graphic novel field has, now has its own sort of canon, and it also needs to be disrupted the way that, we're trying to disrupt canonical text teaching in just standard English classrooms. So this is a group specifically for those ones that maybe aren't going to be shortlisted for the big awards or don't have the huge publishing industry behind them, marketing them. So I've found some really eclectic, powerful pieces from that Facebook group. And then comic books teachers, as well as everyone who is either new to this, been doing it for decades, but sharing stories, anecdotes, and pictures of student work, essential questions for lesson plans. Just a really productive way to be on your phone is to join those groups. And yes, definitely your library. Sounds like Talia had a big role at her library, curating a comics collection. I live in Portland, Oregon, where pretty much every residential neighborhood has its own comics shop. I know not every city is so lucky, but you probably at least have one, and they are great people to just walk in with a mask on and get some recommendations, or even to call them up. And finally, I'm a contributing writer at Book Riot, and that is a online sort of literary magazine where we basically just write recommendations of books to read, and very eclectic lists, curated lists based on what our readers are looking to read. And so if you just type in graphic novels or comics on the Book Riot site, you will see dozens of articles like, you know, the perfect graphic novel to read if you like roller derby and are between the ages of 8 and 16. You know, I know we all can think of Roller Girl, but they've come up with 10 more. So that's a great place for just kind of those listicles that are themed around age level. And finally, my last recommendation is Rocco Versace has been teaching with graphic novels for maybe 30 years. Let's see, I have his book right here. And this is not a list of graphic novels or comics that you can use. It's more of an academic work of scholarship about the richness and complex rigor in a variety of graphic novels, and he covers so many different genres and time periods and cultures. I got more ideas about what types of graphic novels to bring into the classroom for book circles, like books about new journalism, memoir, books about environmental comics, indigenous comics, books about graphic medicine, from just reading this book. So he does have a bibliography at the end, which I guess could serve as a great resource for some really great places to start. Okay, those are my recommendations.
Awesome. We're about to move on, but before we do so, Bill or Britta, do you want to add to this list? We've got a pretty robust list thus far, but if you want to add something, now's the time.
Yeah, I'll throw a couple of things in there. If you're on Instagram, Bookstagram is a subheading that gets you all sorts of really interesting stuff about books, and like anywhere else in the world right now, graphic novels play pretty heavily in that. I have a blog called Book Commercials. It's at bookcommercials.wordpress.com. It sounds really similar to what Meryl is doing. They're reviews that are specifically for teachers. I'd say about 2/3 of those are graphic novels, and it'll contain, opening couple lines, quick summary. Why is this book worth reading? Who is it best for? And is it likely to be challenged? You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at BBC_onbooks. And then I'll put in a plug too. Shveta sort of did this already, but the We Need Diverse Books hashtag has a lot of graphic novels in it, but also a lot of really good books that sometimes get overlooked. And if you put that in Instagram, you get flooded with recommendations, which is really fantastic. And then also podcasts that you might want to check out, especially if you're maybe a teacher, but also thinking maybe you'd like to make some graphic novels someday, or you'd just like to know more about the industry. Gina Gagliano, who used to be at First Second, and she's now at Abrams, does something called Graphic Novel TK. You can find it if you just search on your browser, and that has some really cool episodes just about sort of behind the scenes and how that works. And then real quickly, this is my first book, and I think I have this maybe on a slide at the end. And my new book that just comes out, which is really targeted for English folks. And both those have at the end a long list of graphic novels you might want to use, divided in the case of this one by which subject area, mostly high school. And in the other one, it's divided by units for teaching English. So yeah, a good list. My goodness, you people know some good stuff.
Britta, I'm assuming that we will, sounds good. One final thing, there, particularly with ComicCon at home, there have been many panels, and often they will conclude with book recommendations. There might be some degree of having to, there's often a lot of good information as well. So feel free to go to these conventions, go to panels. If they don't actually have book recommendations in there, feel free to ask the question of people. People are friendly. We want this to happen. We will happily give you many, many recommendations if you would like. So here are, and let's do this a little bit quickly, resources to continue to support your lesson plans and your lesson planning. And we're going to start with Meryl.
Okay, this is also from my website, meryljaffe.com. I don't know how many lessons. I have written down here 30 plus lessons, but they're really they're very detailed. So there's a summary of the graphic novel, and then there are lesson plan suggestions for content area lessons, whether it's social studies, whether it's language arts, STEM, STEAM. I also give additional resource links. So whatever the lesson suggestions are, I will give you links that I've tested that you can use to support the lessons or to have students go further. I also have recommended paired reading suggestions, and sometimes the paired reading suggestions are graphic novels, sometimes they're prose, sometimes they're primary sources. It could be whatever it is that I think can add to whatever lessons or teaching or learning that you're doing with that specific graphic novel. And if you look at the image, the 3 top ones are American-born Chinese, Aya, and Baby Mouse. And if you know these graphic novels, they actually cover quite a range of an age range of readers. But again, meryljaffe.com, you go into resources and lessons, and you'll find very, very detailed lessons for 30 plus graphic novels. Also in our book, Worth 1,000 Words, I mean, we have a section on what to do if something gets challenged. We have research to help support your decisions in terms of why you want to use, what you want to use. We also have several lesson plans in terms of teaching writing, in terms of teaching reading, again, content area, and visual literacy. We also have lessons in terms of how to teach kids how to read graphic novels and how to teach uninitiated teachers how to read graphic novels, because Ty and I have found that a lot of reasons why teachers aren't using graphic novels or haven't been using graphic novels is because they're still not comfortable reading them themselves. So we have 2 chapters that just talk about how to be more comfortable in terms of, again, integrating the visual, the image, the design, the way the page is set up, the rhythm, the text, everything, all the decisions that were and were not included. There's also, if you go to cbldf.org, I've done a lot of lesson plans there. You can use using graphic novels in education. That's the last link. That also has lessons. And they also, if you ever have any questions about challenges or about anything, they have a number of resources that you can use there too. And if you have any questions, please just email me at meryljaffe.com. I love hearing from people, and I love brainstorming, and I look forward to communication. Thank you.
Britta, why don't you talk a little bit about how you teach with them, or how you put things together? Yeah.
Sure. And I'll keep it pretty brief. So, I mean, I strictly teach 8th grade, and I don't have the luxury of writing my own curriculum, but I have found a way to incorporate graphic novels into my curriculum. First starting as, I really just started as like a comprehension tool, but there's so much more than that. And just by trying it, you yourself will get more comfortable as time goes on, and your students are going to teach you more as time goes on. So using them, if you need to start to help your striving readers with comprehension, but even your at-grade level and your accelerated students will benefit from using graphic novels. I mean, as everyone has been saying so far today, they are rich and they are real, and they aren't just picture books. There's so much more to explore with them, to use them as supplemental text, as core text. Like, don't be afraid, just like dive into it and give it a try. I just listed the 3 that I use because, once again, I follow a pretty strict curriculum. It's wonderful, I love it, but I do have to follow a curriculum. So I use these books to first start with my striving readers, but then I also use them as extension activities to compare form and content and even further their learning of the general essential question that we're working with. with my at grade level and accelerated students. So don't be afraid to just give it a try. It's just naturally going to build the confidence up for you and for your students as your learning in your modules and knowledge building moves forward.
Shveta, you're up.
I was just going to jump in a second about Britta's. One of the things that impresses me about the way Britta approaches her lesson planning is she starts with the units that her curriculum requires, and then she goes and finds graphic novels that are going to fit. And that's a really nice approach to take. It means you have to generate your own lesson plans, but those graphic novels that she picks really fit nicely with what she's doing and help her achieve those goals. So that's a really good way to operate. Sorry, Shveta, I didn't mean to step on you. Go right ahead.
That was well said, Bill. Thanks. Shveta, you're up.
Great, yeah. So one thing that I didn't mention earlier when we talked about surprises was the biggest surprise I encountered when teaching a memoir unit with Persepolis and then later many other different graphic memoirs. Part of our unit is that, of course, they're going to create their own mini memoirs using the form, using the mentor text that we've studied. And what was surprising about it was the level of bravery that students exhibited when telling these stories. You know, I had taught narrative writing many times. Students had written I am poems, and they'd written songs about themselves. You know, they had done a lot of writing exercises where they had opportunities to talk about formative experiences in their lives. But nothing had prepared me for the level of emotional rawness, sometimes trauma, that students were going to reveal in their graphic stories. And so I've written a lot about why that was. What is it about the form that promotes that kind of authentic, brave storytelling in students? It really often seemed like they were using the project as an opportunity to heal or communicate important messages to their peers, or sometimes even to me, with very simple, elegant, minimalist drawings. You know, this in the English class, this was not an art class. This was not a unit on fine rendering and creating artistic beauty. It was about storytelling. And so some of the resources that I put together to kind of help others create that same experience for their students, to have that kind of those tools in their basket to tell stories of all kinds that they thought they could never tell before, include first a few more books, but one is this book Slow Looking by Sherry Tishman. She's part of the Harvard's Project Zero group, who first came on the scene with the Making Thinking Visible strategies and visible thinking, or visual thinking strategies. The thing I loved so much about Slow Looking, like Meryl and I were talking about before, is just teaching students to slow down and really observe with their own funds of knowledge, their own experiences, their own cultural lenses, their own world views, to all look at the same very simple panel, very spare, elegant, minimalist artwork, and start observing, naming, listing, describing, before they, without being sort of told, here are some look-fors. And so I've sort of found over the years that instead of beginning my unit by giving students a way to read the page, or sometimes I've seen that teachers often give like a labeled page, like this is a bleed, this is a splash, this is a technique called blankety blank, look for these things, they mean these things. Just the way that we wouldn't necessarily want to introduce, you know, a rich prose novel by saying this author's going to use 8 similes on this page and 4 metaphors and personification. You know, it was really more about teaching students to look for themselves and to cultivate that experience of taking the time, care, and attention to look at not just a graphic novel, but any kind of media, and even just the environment around them, and make meaning from that, and see the variety of things that people see when we're all looking at this same very simple superficially simple drawing. The next thing I want to talk about is to create their graphic stories. I know today we've talked mostly about reading them and studying them, but to me, in teaching English literature classes, anything that we read is some sort of mentor text. It's a way to teach. We read so that we learn how to write and communicate with others. So at the end of a study, we're often trying to create some kind of version of the mentor text we've studied. We've learned about the craft and structure of it. Now let's experience the time and care it takes to actually execute that in maybe new ways that depart from what we've studied. So one thing that I found as a big challenge to that is, again, the drawing. You know, students often will, I think studies show, maybe Bill has some more research on this, but studies show that I think by by age 8 or 9, a lot of young people, that's where they stop thinking of drawing as something enjoyable and for fun. It's when they start saying things like, I can't draw, or, oh, I hate drawing, or I'm bad at drawing, I'm bad at art. And that sort of joy and creativity and natural storytelling that young children do with drawing has sort of been replaced with this expectation that there's some sort of benchmark to meet with their drawings. And so at the high school level, in an English classroom where the goals are not to do fine rendering, you know, and incorporate all sorts of drawing techniques, it was that that just giving them that bravery to put pen to paper, to use very simple drawings to tell a meaningful story. So quickly, I'll just recommend Cartooning by Ivan Brunetti. You can see the picture on the cover. He does very simple drawings. He teaches you how to create a lot of meaning and significance with just simple shapes. After one lesson, your students will begin to have the confidence to incorporate that into their storytelling. And then Making Comics by Linda Berry as well. It's actually written in graphic form, but both of those books are full of 15-minute mini lessons and activities that you can pull and do in your classroom to start to equip your students with the skills that they'll need to tell graphic stories.
My apologies, Bill. We're getting pretty close to time, so I think we're going to wrap up. Basically, this is supposed to start a conversation. This is a community of practitioners from all areas, and you should absolutely reach out to this fantastic panel, myself included, if you have any questions. And as we do this, if you guys have any final words, anything that you think everyone else should be looking for on the horizon that's coming from you, now is the chance to wrap things up. And Britta, any closing words?
I love collaborating with lesson plans and making sure that everything is at grade level and rigorous for our students. All students are capable of greatness, so why go below their grade level? So I would love to hear from you if you would like to compare or revise or collaborate. There's my email. Feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to start a conversation.
Awesome. Meryl, you're up.
I love collaborating. I love it when people email me and ask me questions or follow up from panels that I've done or whatever. So please, if you have any questions, Talia asked us to give a list of things that we like talking about. So I love talking about visual literacy, multimodal literacy, graphic novels, and content area learning. I love talking about how to choose a graphic novel, graphic novels. I love graphic novels. You might love that, it will work for you, might not work for you. Lesson suggestions. I also, because I did a lot of work with Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, I can really help people if they have any questions about challenges or advocacy for literary selections. And I also love talking about graphic novel adaptations. And just one closing word is just keep trying. We're all learning. I think everyone's learning. And there are so many, so many great books. Keep learning, keep reading, keep talking, keep sharing. And I'd love to be part of that conversation, so feel free to contact me. Thank you very much, Talia.
Shveta.
Same as everyone. I think, shoot, my website is not on there. I think it's on a different slide, but Shveta Miller, just my name right there, .com. You can email me from there. I am deep in the drafting stages of writing that teaching resource about 12 hacks to take your graphic novel teaching to a deeper level. And I am interviewing tons of teachers for that book. So if you have already tried teaching graphic novels, or you've had some unique successes, or just even a story to share, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear your story and interview you for my book. I'm also available to talk about anything related to graphic novel teaching, but maybe specifically these 3 items I've listed here. One resource I do want to make sure you know about is I did record a model reading of 1 page of Persepolis with me and another reader, just analyzing the page together, using the kinds of sentence stems that you might find helpful to teach your students, to give them the power to really discuss those pages on their own without following a prescribed list of questions or things to look for. And that's available on YouTube. I think if you just Google Persepolis Close Reading, you should find it. And it's great for online learning right now. You can play it for your class.
So me, I'm Talia Hurwich. You can email me at my email from NYU. I have done a lot of wide-ranging work in my studies. You can see this list. I would repeat what everyone else has said. I love teaching. I love talking to teachers. I love thinking about how to do stuff better. We are so frequently thought of as lone adults in a sea of students. And I think that part of the charm of teaching is that there is a community. And I do want to encourage that sense. And yeah, Bill, why don't you wrap up?
Well, just 2 quick things. One is, as we've said, all of us are interested in either collaborating, or in my case, I'm interested in learning more about what teachers do. So do feel free to reach out to us. We all want to talk to other teachers. And then I would say this often happens in panels like this. You know, English is the rock star for using graphic novels, but we sometimes forget that all other subjects can use them as well. There are so many graphic novels out there. So for math, science, history, even things like phys ed and the arts, there's a lot of room in there. The book that I have here that's shown is this one that comes out in just a couple days from Bloomsbury. But my other book, this one, is one that really digs into other disciplines and how we use graphic novels in those disciplines. And I'd love to chat about that as well. So it was good getting a chance to talk to all of you, and I think it'll be good for all of you who are watching to get involved and use graphic novels in your teaching.
Yeah. Once again, well said, Bill. Thank you for that. Thank you to everyone here. The amount that you have done is really astounding. And I thank you for sharing your time and knowledge. And for everyone else who has been watching this, thank you for your time and your patience in watching all of this. Once again, this panel has been Teaching the Teachers. And I wish you all a good day, wherever you may be. Take care.
Thank you, Talia.
Yeah, thank you, Talia.